Gormaga Cahirley, and thanks, Minister, for your contribution and indeed for the reports which I have read. I think on the fundamentally what we all want to do is to get to a situation. I think we're all committed to ending homelessness, and we're all committed to doing what we can to ensure that happens. I think the clarity and the transparency of those figures are important, and I'm wondering, have you a response yourself or your department, a response to what Focus Ireland's response to the reports this morning, when Mike Allen said that this report was a communication strategy for bad news rather than a research strategy to solve a problem. Like, that is quite a serious charge, I would have thought, from a group who are on the front line in dealing with the homeless situation. I have a couple of questions that I just want to go through, because I know we're restricted to 5 minutes, and I would appreciate your response. I'm wondering, it's stated in the report very clearly that the government intends to achieve a capacity for a more detailed analysis. And how is that being done with fewer details? When we're looking at that, if we're looking at quarterly reporting as opposed to monthly reporting, and I'm just wondering, what the rationale and how that would actually be done. That if you have less data that you're willing to publish, well, then how is it easier to look at trends and to react, and indeed to be proactive by looking at trends to remove people from risk areas? I do want to ask in particular, and I don't want to jump from one to the other, but the Homeless Interagency Group as well, which was set up, and I have raised this by way of parliamentary question. It has only met once in 2017, is my understanding, and that group was set up going back to 2007. I wonder, have you replaced it formally now? Like, is there other structures that you're using, or do you intend? I would have thought that would be that would be something that we should be looking at reactivating, if anything. So maybe if we start with them, but really from my perspective, it's crucially important that I think that we have more oversight, not less. And the report, again, Focus Ireland have said that they take issue with the fact that the report does not mention the overwhelming evidence that there was a growing shortage of properties available within HAP limits. Are we again looking to revise that? To see, I see there has been work done in relation to risk areas about stopping families falling into homelessness, and again, so I just maybe like to be a little bit more expansive on that. I wasn't too sure when I heard that Eileen Gleeson mentioned on Morning Ireland that it wasn't actually a huge problem for the DHRE in relation to the HAP limits. I didn't see that was a problem, that people were falling into homelessness because we hadn't actually moved forward with our HAP limits. So maybe if you could address those couple of items, I'll come back in afterwards. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Darragh. Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Deputy, for your question. To come to your first point, was in relation to the response that we saw from Focus Ireland. This was a very disappointing response from Focus, in my opinion, to attack the Dublin Regional Homeless Executive in this way. The DRHE are on the front line, helping thousands of people, doing an incredible amount of work, and they work with Focus, and they work with Simon, and they work with McVerry, and together they do excellent work. This report is a detailed study. It's not as detailed as I would like it to be. We need to do more work in this area, that's clear. That also comes with some robust recommendations, and also speaks to some truths that we need to speak to about in relation to people's fears around HAP. We need to speak to those. We need to be honest about these things. So it's a very welcome report. I'm interested in driving the solutions here and us working together to do that. And that's what I think we should be focused on. Focus seemed to have picked a particular line out of the Interagency Group report, which is a different one, and attacked the DRHE on that. And I think there's a misinterpretation of that line in the Interagency Group report, and maybe we can come back to that in a further round of questions. In relation to the recommendation that's come in both separate reports to move to quarterly reporting, no decision has been made on this. And there's not going to be a quick jump to any decision on this either. What we have now is the kind of detail that you'd like to see in a quarterly report, but actually more than that. I think it's important to note that increased frequency does not mean increased transparency. There is a reason why a number of bodies produce quarterly reports, because over a quarter you can better understand trends, you can get more detail, the kind of detail that we don't get in monthly reporting. Monthly reporting each month gives us a few different numbers, some are up, some are down. It doesn't give us the detailed information that we have in this. So one of the things that I know we need to do is we have to reform the paths collection system of information, so we can get more detailed information in that. And that's something that we are going to do, and to see about upgrading that, and then see what is the best way to publish information that actually tells us things that are helpful in terms of policy formation. This report has told us something very helpful about HAP. We'll get into that in more detail, I'm sure, that the monthly reports don't tell us. In relation to the operation of HAP at the moment, so far this year, roughly about 2,270 tenancies have been established through HAP, just this year alone. And that includes about 900 homeless HAP tenancies have been established. And we continue to establish 300 to 350 HAP tenancies a week. HAP is working, it is successful, but there are some problems that need to be now fixed to help people who are getting trapped, if you like, in emergency accommodation, or who fear going down the HAP route because of either what they've heard or because it might not meet some of the needs that they feel a permanent home would meet. And I understand that, but we need to talk about some policy responses that will help fix those issues. In relation to, you mentioned it was the interagency group, but the interagency group, is the group that was established at the September Housing Summit. You're talking about a different group, which is called the National Homeless Consultative Committee. It will meet again this year. The recommendation in the interagency group is that it meet on a biannual basis. And it's very important that groups meet and groups share information, but we are in constant contact with the NGO sector. We constantly meet them in a roundtable format, and ahead of the next Housing Summit that's on the 3rd of July, we'll have another engagement like that. So
you're not standing down the NHCC?
No, we're not, but in a way we became more proactive, and so there were more regular meetings happening through different arrangements. But it will meet again. I mean, that's one of the recommendations of the interagency group. And that was your first set of questions, Deputy.
Okay, thank you.
I'd have 10 minutes between the two of you. You have 2 minutes left if you want to ask anything else.
No, I think that the focus on HAP, I will, if you don't mind, that you have mentioned, particularly with regard to the fears around HAP, and I discussed this with your department officials. Would you consider, there's the transfer to or when one goes on HAP to going on the housing transfer list, it's not uniform as to how each local authority is dealing with that, and I believe that a lot of people will not transfer to HAP because they don't believe that they're staying on the main housing list, and that's a big problem for people who are 8, 9, 10 years on a housing list. When you say, well, okay, you're on HAP now, we may be able to assist in sourcing a rental property that's got a 12-month lease, but you're not on the housing list, and then you go back and you explain, well, you're actually on the transfer list. So there is, and understandably in my view, a resistance to that. So that needs to be, I would believe, Minister, changed, and we need a uniform approach to this across the country. We also need a uniform approach towards the discretionary payments, the additional discretionary payment for HAP as well, and also where people receive top-up payments and assistance from their family. That I've had instances whereby HAP has been refused in total because a local authority is not allowed an additional top-up payment. But more importantly, I think it's about the uniform nature of the application of HAP and where the person who is, or the family indeed, is on the housing list, where they sit on the housing list. When you actually have to explain, sorry, you're on to the transfer list and there's another main housing list, there is, I think we all understand, I think all of us would understand where there would be that serious concern and resistance. So when you talk about picking up from this report, and I think there are some very good items that have been highlighted here about the fears and the limitations of HAP, what I'm asking specifically is how quickly then will you move to making some of these changes? I know you've indicated that you will take our views on board and the committee's views on board. I would be saying to you directly here that if someone goes on HAP, that they should remain on the main housing list, full stop, and take away the ambiguity altogether. And I don't understand what the resistance to doing that is. Maybe there's not resistance, but I don't understand why it hasn't been done up to now. And I think that would make a massive difference straight away, very quickly. You would certainly have my support if you were to move towards that change. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Deputy. I mean, just in relation to the process here, the purpose for this engagement is to take views from the committee as to what you think, as a committee or as individual representatives, feel the best way forward is based on the information in the reports. I've written to the local authority chief executives in advance of the next Housing Summit to tell them that the kind of dual focus that we'll have at that summit, one of those aspects is, of course, these reports and what that will mean. So what I would like to do in advance of the summit and at the summit in the course of it is to come to some decisions with the local authority chief executives on some things that we need to do. Other recommendations are for myself and other departments to have to continue to do a body of work until we actually come to a policy change, because some of the recommendations speak to progressing or reviewing or investigating. In relation to HAP, I mean, first thing to say is that HAP is successful, but there is definitely a fear around HAP for different reasons. And, you know, HAP tenancies have failed, but tenancies in the normal private sector fail, and social housing homes fail for tenants as well. HAP does meet the housing need. That is, under the legislation, it meets the housing need of the person, so they come off the housing list. And for the vast majority of people, it is meeting the housing need. But there is a transfer list there, and we need to make sure that local authorities are actually using that transfer list, because to date, just under 1,000 people have come off the transfer list, come from a HAP into a permanent social housing home. We need to increase the delivery through the transfer stream.
And not at all to interrupt you, but just to add, is that the long-term housing need, well, you might say the housing need is met. For someone's security, the long-term housing need, they don't believe it is met if you're going into a tenancy arrangement that is a 12-month, as opposed to getting a home, a social, you know, that's the difference.
But